looks like a software itself actually boasts several capabilities that we're familiar with from advanced malware, things like anti-VM. So it is VM aware. It knows if you're trying to research it or dropping it onto a sandbox. It knows if you're trying to run in debug mode in order to actually research it. A lot of these back and forth cat and mouse game between researchers and malware developers, they're aware of the techniques we use to analyze them. And then they actually put all kinds of things in the way that will make our life harder. So Mac OS itself is not immune to these types of attacks. This is on the technical level. On the business level, you have different ransomware groups like the PISA group, which is they have their naming and shaming website. Now, they're not the biggest name out there. You might have heard of Maze, which I'll talk on in the next couple of slides. But they actually put the information out there. They say, we attacked this organization, and we're going to distribute all the information that we stole from them. By the way, when they mention partners, as you can see here in one of their screenshots, oops, I'm sorry for skipping. It really looks like the old school Norton interface. When they say partners, they mean victims. That's who their partners are. And they talk about this dual payment option where they say, okay, we're going to ransom your system, so you're going to be non-operational. And then we're also going to post this, and everybody can download your information. And actually, I wanted to ask you, Doug, do you see these kind of dual payment? It's not really an option, but these dual payment attacks as well?
Absolutely. We see the the double extortion attempts is what we refer to them as, where they'll first extort you for decrypting your data, and then whether you do or don't, they're also going to come at you for the extortion of releasing your information. And I think what's important to note about that, Itai, is that there's a certain protection that I think any organization would have with cyber insurance for the cost of getting their data back. And I'm not. I don't have as much experience with insurance that I'm sure some of the viewers do, but something we run into quite a bit is that second attempt to extort the victim has no protection from insurance. You can't transfer that risk to another third party. You're going to have to manage it, and you're going to have a plan in place for how to handle that, and understand what the cost benefit scenario is when you find yourself in that position.
Understood. Yeah. Tough thing. And I mean, PISA, like I mentioned before, is not the only group that does that. You can see here on the left hand, you can see Maze, who actually stopped their website a couple of months ago. It's not like they went and start doing charity work now. They're still doing bad stuff, just this, not under the Maze name. And they share information, about different attacks that they've done, and other groups do the same as well. So you can see here different groups also prompting and advertising other ransomware teams. In fact, here's a note from last year, from June of last year, almost a year ago, by the Maze team. And this note is like, it's like the ROI, the return on investment of why you should pay them once they ransom you. And it's really interesting to read. It kind of gets you into the mindset of how they operate and how they think. So you can see here, Maze team is working hard on collecting and analyzing the information about our clients. Again, clients, victims. So the company is attacked, files were blocked and encrypted. What's the worst mistakes that company can make? Now they're going to why you should work with them. They're saying, first of all, we can't be decrypted. A few companies we're not going to name, try to decrypt. Oh, not going to name, right? All of a sudden they're worried about, the privacy. The files and the help of side organizations. Those organizations are well-known security companies. That happened at the end of 2019, still waiting for a solution. So they're saying you're going to pay more in an attempt to decrypt us rather than pay us. But then look what they say here, and it goes directly with what Doug just mentioned. Encrypting the files is not the main risk. If the company has chosen to make long pausing operations, it's the company's right. But sometimes company can understand the risk of information leak, especially private information. We specialize in private information, financial databases, NDA documents, and all that. Usually that kind of information leads to multi-million losses, fines, and lawsuits. So again, they're trying to put the pressure on the victim, saying, you know, we are not your only problem. You're going to have other problems coming in as well. They say here that, as we know from reports of our clients, again, victims, the average recovery cost is about 60 million. We have never asked for amounts even close to those. So, you know, they're good. They're asking for smaller amounts. And they're talking now here about statistics and so on. So they're trying to convince the victims to pay them. Now, when you read about ransomware attacks, this is something that really, really bothers me specifically. Here's an example of a headline from late last year or mid last year. REvil ransomware hits Jack Daniels manufacturer. First of all, leave Jack Daniels out of it. You know, hard time with COVID as it is. Don't touch the alcohol. But you read about this and people tend to think, oh, there's a ransomware attack happening. And I think that's not the mindset we should be in, because it's not reality. If you take a look at the MITRE ATT&CK framework, which is a great framework, I love using it for red teaming, for building, performing gap analysis. If you take a look at the MITRE ATT&CK framework, for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, this is what it looks like. You can see on the top, you can see the different tactics from reconnaissance, so from very what we call left of boom, all the way to the impact. So the different tactics and then the different techniques for each of these tactics. What I did is I took this REvil ransomware and I put all the tactics in here. And actually, the ransomware attack is here. So actually, the attack is done. It's over. The attack already happened. Look how many stages happened beforehand where potentially, I'm not saying that you can stop 100%. You can't stop everything that's coming at you, but there are opportunities here to actually identify the threat and potentially, you know, put some blocks in its way. And this, to me, is directly connected to one of the sayings that I used to say as well during my during some of my sessions, and I don't think it's true anymore. We used to show these pictures and talk about how the attackers need to be right only once and the defenders have to be right all the time, right? You'll hear that from a lot of defensive teams. And I get it, being a defender is extremely hard work. And, you know, I used to show this locks and say, you know, it's enough that you pick apart just one lock and this whole thing falls apart. And that's kind of the defense we have today, right? The attacker only need to be right once and they're in. Actually, I think we're changing this mindset now, and looking back at this slide, we can say, you know what? The attacker has to be right a lot of different times in order to reach that final stage. Now, all these stages may happen really quickly. Some of them may be even easy to do, but I think we do have an opportunity here to stop him in multiple areas. And so I think the defenders have the ability to stop this, and the attacker has to be right a lot of different times as well. Again, I'm not saying that being a defender is easy. The attacker will always have the advantage. At the very least, they'll have the initiative of being the first one to act. But I think we can, you know, change this kind of approach. And I wanted to share with you some headlines, pretty recent headlines, some of which I honestly, even if you'd asked me 3-4 years ago, I wouldn't think that we'd be reading today. A headline like this, a very recent headline: food shortage at Dutch supermarkets after ransomware outage. So a ransomware attack causing food shortage. It's kind of mind-boggling to think about it, how far and how deep these attacks can go and how they can affect. There were a lot of different articles about ransomware attacks against universities and schools, and the fact that these academic facilities around us are being targeted, which affects, you know, our kids and students. And I think this is also another important point. Ransomware, the internet's biggest security crisis, is getting worse. We need a way out. And the problem here is this article is referencing or hinting towards the pay or not pay situation that a victim has. And for those of you who are not familiar with the OFAC advisory, this is an advisory from October of last year by the Department of Treasury, which talks about facilitating ransomware payments. And they actually say in this advisory that under authority of IEEPA, and so on, US persons are generally prohibited from engaging in transactions directly or indirectly with individuals or entities of OFAC specially designated nationals. And if you're wondering who those companies are, or they actually talk about this in the advisory, they have a list of almost all the ransomware groups, big ones that are out there. You know, Maze, Samsam, they're Petya, they're all there listed. So what they're actually saying here is, if you pay the ransom, you know, there may be some sanctions and regulations that you might be facing because of that, which again puts the victim in such a difficult situation. Not only are you now not operationalizing, you have a group that says they will advertise everything they know about you. Now you also have regulatory issues of maybe you can't pay them. They also say in this advisory that, you know, if you do encounter this situation, here's our list of recommended government agencies that you should approach. They specifically mentioned here first the Treasury Office, but you can also see the FBI Cyber Task Force, which is an easy segue for me to actually bring back Doug and have Doug talk a little bit about how to respond to ransomware attacks and what a victim can do from when they encounter these threats. So anything you can share about attacks and the victims.
Of course.
Just let me know how fast you want me to scroll. Just tell me click and I'll do it.
Sure.
No
So
problem.
just going real quick, going back to one of your previous slides about the attack MITRE attack framework.
Yep.
You know, the ransomware takes up a lot of our time because that's what's impacting the victims. But I think what as you'd mentioned, what really should be you know, focused on is that there's a whole you know, timeline of events that have occurred before the ransomware was deployed. So even though ransomware takes up my time, that vector to get into the network, it differs across not only variants, but it differs within the same variant of ransomware. So you know, we are seeing ransomware as you mentioned, as a being offered as a service. So these ransomware groups are essentially licensing their software out so that, you know, attackers can have another tool for their attack and another way to monetize their attack, because just stealing your information may or may not get your attention, but when you can't access your files, it adds to the expediency which you have to make a decision. So I think that's a very important point that I don't want to stumble over, but I want to focus on it and make sure everyone understands that you know, we're well aware of the impact to the victim. The ransomware, you know, headlines is what gets a lot of the media involved and makes a big splash. But behind the scenes, I don't want anyone to be to misunderstand that this is essentially hacking. I mean, nowadays, if you're a criminal hacker and you're looking to do so professionally and as a means of income, ransomware is absolutely something that you are going to utilize to increase your revenue, you know, throughout your activities. But when you do experience something like a ransomware attack, or even if there are some things that you're seeing in your network that look suspicious, or what we sometimes get is their files are locked. They haven't gotten any communications from a subject, and they're just kind of waiting to be notified that there's a problem. So we want to, you know, we do a number of outreach events here at the FBI, not only myself, but my colleagues here, because we want to make sure that everyone has the right expectation when they do notify the FBI for what our authorities allow us to get involved in, and then what we wouldn't do, and kind of when the right time is to bring us on. So Itai, you can go back to that FBI page on the slide, but just to give everyone kind of a point of reference. And getting back to that OFAC issue that you mentioned, there's an increasing, you know, number of groups that are becoming involved in this ransomware mitigation. So not only do you have the incident response companies, but you've got, you know, services that might negotiate your ransom. There's a certainly legal consultants or representation for your firm. There's also going to be, now we've seen there's OFAC consultants will come in and identify if that Bitcoin address or that virtual currency address is in one of those sanctioned countries that we are unable to legitimately do business with, and be able to warn the victim, that they may be penalized for paying into that country. Just taking a step back, at the FBI, we here have a cyber task force, as every field office does. And the task force model has worked very successfully with terrorism and counterterrorism. And it's a way to kind of share information back and forth. So we identify local, state and federal law enforcement officers in the area. And we bring them together into our office, and we work next to them, and we work cases just as we would with other FBI agents. We work them with state and local task force officers. Here in Boston, we've got a number of TFOs, as we refer to them. We work with the IRS, the Department of Education, OIG, as well as the Federal Protective Service and the New Hampshire State Police. We're also in good close contact with the Secret Service and the Mass State Police. So we have a good kind of information sharing group at the FBI for law enforcement that work cybercrime. You can advance, Itai, if you'd like. Our just like every field office, there's going to be an area of responsibility. So the FBI separates the country into 56 different field offices. Our field office here handles Massachusetts, Maine, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island. In some of these areas, we've got smaller offices that serve as kind of a satellite office to the Boston division. But for the most part, all the cybercrime investigations occur and take place here on the squad, regardless of what state or jurisdiction it might be in. And we also differentiate between, as I mentioned, criminal and national security. Attribution is a kind of the most difficult thing to do earlier in an investigation. We do our best, and because of the authorities in PPD 41, because of the fact that an attack could be a nation state, we early on give the national security squad some quick indicators to help us make that decision of if it would be a criminal case or national security investigation. And we put the case, open up the case on the squad, and we go on our way. In some countries and in other cyber groups that I've worked in, forensics is part of that cybercrime group. And while our investigators are forensically trained, we don't handle the forensics for the whole office here in Boston. We have a regional forensics lab that we're very close with, but they don't work investigations, and we don't handle the forensics beyond what the scope is for our own cases. Itai, you can advance there. So, and just to give everyone a kind of a bigger perspective and kind of where we fit in day to day is in the greater Department of Justice. It's the in the executive branch, and there is actually a new AG after General or AG Barr has left the post as Attorney General. We've got a new Attorney General. His name's Merrick Garland, who was appointed just recently as the AG. So that's an update there. But essentially, the Department of Justice prosecutes crimes, and they don't prosecute crimes that are investigated solely by the FBI, but they prosecute crimes that occur across the whole federal government. So if the Secret Service or Homeland Security has a case, they'll bring it to DOJ, and that'll get charged out of DOJ just as it would for one of ours. So some contact information and good things that the group should kind of keep in their back pocket here. We've got a CyWatch group, which is a watch center in our headquarters that handles all of the coordination between the field offices, the private sector, as well as some other federal law enforcement agencies and intelligence agencies down in DC. That number should only be used if there is an emergency that is gonna putting the organization in a very serious situation. Generally, we like to use the ic3.gov portal to intake complaints and victim notifications, and it allows us to have one central kind of area where we are looking at those across the whole FBI and not just within the Boston division specifically, so they can start to identify trends a little bit earlier. The ic3.gov team is all centrally located, and then they send that complaint to the right cybercrime unit. But CyWatch would be a good place if you had to have a good number in your incident response book. You can't get in touch with your local FBI office. You need some assistance. It's kind of a last resort, so to speak.
Okay. Actually, Doug, I know we didn't plan, but a quick question to you, because something that I think people watching this would be asking themselves. When would you recommend getting in touch with the FBI? I mean, I'm sure people think, well, I got an attack. I all of a sudden have these flashing, screens of the ransomware. Do I first go to my insurance? Do I go to a negotiator? Do I go to an incident response company? Do I talk to my, when do you think they should, or where do you feel they should involve and give you a call or, contact CyWatch in this situation?
Yeah, so it's definitely up to the victim when they want to contact us. I do, as I said, want to set the expectation that we are not an incident response organization when it comes to a cyber event in your organization. We want to be part of the solution, but in your incident response plan, which everyone should have, we should be one of those numbers to contact, but probably not the first number. You should really have an IR team that's going to come together and determine if it's responsible to get an incident response, a third party involved. If it's something that the IT team doesn't have time to handle, because they're also handling the endpoints and the users that are unable to log in. Maybe we bring in a third party. Maybe we bring in a law firm to just kind of quarterback the whole thing and help us make some of these decisions. The better you plan, the less I think you'll definitely be able to kind of absorb some of that impact initially and save a lot of time in having to make some decisions that are important. We want to be part of the solution. So if there's a good time, if there's a 24-hour period where we can ask of the victim to provide us with a ransom note, or the indicators that were identified, we're not going to get involved and plug keyboards into your networks and start to look at log files and try and be on site by any means. We want to allow the victim to conduct their own investigation and provide us with results that are most helpful for us if they're from the edge of the victim network out into the rest of the world. So our strength is really serving legal process on providers, identifying other linked investigations in the FBI or in the federal government that we may be able to leverage information and intelligence from to help find the subjects. But these investigations are years long because there's so many overseas pieces of so many overseas leads that we need to cover and coordinate on. We don't have the authority, obviously, to go into another country and demand subscriber records. So we need to engage their law enforcement, engage their government, explain what the crime is, provide them in a lot of cases with facts and sometimes probable cause that that crime is being committed in their country. So it's a long process when we start to go across the borders. And we've made some great headway over the past decade of putting cyber FBI agents at the embassies around the world. I think there's almost 100 now that we have that have a good understanding of what that host country is going to need for FBI cases. And then in a lot of times, there's these countries that have victims in their own countries that are using infrastructure from the US. So we have that not only the seeking assistance from other countries, but we're also helping investigators from our partners and allies that we can help to provide the evidence for those investigations. So long story short, Itai, I think the best time to bring us in is as soon as the victim feels comfortable. And what we find is helpful is when the decision makers have already talked to the legal team about when and what the FBI can have access to, because in some cases it may be we can have more information than others, but the bare minimum, we would just hope that the victim could pass over subject, communications accounts, a ransom note, any indicators of the network from the intrusion, or ideally would be if there was an executable that was identified on the victim network that we could obtain a copy of. Those are the kinds of things that we're looking for.
Yeah, but I think you bring up a very important point here that I encountered talking to different security teams. Is it's not like the FBI is going to come in and confiscate your servers. Everything is now forensics. We need to take a look, and it's not like everything is being taken over. So I think that's
Correct.
really important to know.
Yeah, and also, in the recovery, there may be a need to overwrite files or to reformat the operating systems, and we take the mindset that these victims are getting back into operation is our number one concern. So if that means we have to take best evidence and get a copy over email, or we have to copy something to a thumb drive and we'll come pick it up, or you can send it to us later. We don't want to step in the way of any kind of recovery.
Oh, that's good. And I think what also people don't realize, and I was pleasantly surprised in an incident that I helped, without going into names of companies or anything, is the type of information and how fast you can actually get it. I don't mean to now have the FBI getting phone calls from everybody, but I don't think people also realize how valuable and how fast the information can come in the sense of, if you provide, with the Bitcoin wallet. I remember a specific case, where the FBI was able to say, okay, we know this wallet, we know this actor, here's the likelihood of him actually, keeping to his word, and here's the likely, MO of how they got onto your network. And I mean, I think that's really important information right from the get-go. So
yeah, definitely. Yep. Yeah, we have a good we have good communication across the FBI. We also have access to all of each other's cases here, and that's what helps to kind of speed that up. And to be quite frank, Ty, in the majority of cases, there may not be anything that we can offer, but in the percentage that we do, it's an excellent way to add some value and to provide some data to the decision makers that are trying to make trying to base their decisions on something, and it's just another point of reference that they can use.
Excellent. Okay. Oh, almost up to the end of the time that we have now. We'll still have a couple of things we want to talk about. Starting from security frameworks, I can't shut up about the MITRE ATT&CK framework. I think it's an awesome tool, a really good tool if you're doing a gap analysis, if you're doing red teaming, preparing for an attack. But I wanted to show you how it can be used in ransomware cases. So here, for example, I highlighted the Sodino Kibi ransomware, their MO and how they operate. Now, if you're familiar with the MITRE ATT&CK framework, they even say themselves, the information that they have is based on attacks that have already happened. So they don't know what the future will bring. These may change, but this is to the best of their knowledge. It's also based on the information that was publicized. And so you can use it to model and understand what are the different techniques that the attackers for certain types of attacks are going to use, which can also be used backwards, saying, okay, I'm under attack of this actor, let's see what is the likely way that they got in. And I think that's an important point, which I'll talk about in just a couple of slides. So when you use the MITRE ATT&CK framework, you can use their analysis. So here, for example, I have two combined screenshots showing how I selected the Maze ransomware group. And it shows the MOs or the techniques used by this group. You don't have to stick to what their knowledge is. What I actually did is I took 3 different reports about the Maze ransomware group. I took the MITRE techniques that were mentioned them, and I threw them into the MITRE ATT&CK framework, and then created kind of a heat map. I used, for this one, I used the old version. So this is the new version. This is the older version. And what you see here is actually the number of times that a certain technique was used by the Maze ransomware group. So if it's white, as you can see in these areas, it means it wasn't used so far. Again, it doesn't mean it will never be used in the future. It's just so far, these are the tactics that have been observed. Red means it was used in one specific methodology, not one specific attack, but one attack type that we've seen. And it goes to orange is 2, bright orange is 3, yellow is 4, and green is 5. So when you're looking at this from a defender's perspective, I think it's a really good tool that can help you understand, if I want to prepare for an attack by Maze, maybe I want to look into the usage of valid accounts, or maybe I want to test out my systems and see if we can detect a PowerShell. You'll also notice a lot of network-based activity here as well. So it's not just fighting them on the endpoint and on the infection. There are certain things you can find on the network, which if you have the network and the security converge, especially if you have them as one team and not as 2 separate teams, I think it gives you a lot of power when trying to detect and mitigate these types of threats. So the MITRE ATT&CK framework is something we're going to talk about at a different webinar, but I think it's important to at least take a look into it and understand how it operates. Really great for multiple purposes. One thing that I also mentioned before, and I want to mention before we go into the last portion, which is the tips from the ransomware group, is actually personified in this headline from an article from a couple of weeks ago. A company paid millions to get their data back, but forgot to do one thing, so the hackers came back again. And it goes back to the slide that I almost started with of you are here. And just because you're handling the ransom portion of the attack, remember all the things that happened before it. If you don't take care of those problems, whether they're on the endpoint and the network and procedures, it can be a people, processes, technology problem, the attackers may find a way back. And this is exactly what happened with this group, with this organization. They had a ransomware attack. I think I'm pretty sure it was in the UK. They paid millions to actually recover. And 2 weeks later, they didn't take care of the initial issue with the thing that made it, the problem in the network that made it, there was a hole in the first place that allowed the attackers to gain access in the first place. The same attackers came back, ransomware again, and they again paid in millions. And actually, Doug, I wanted to ask you here, is this something that during investigations, when you talk to ransomware victims, is this something that you talk about of hey, let's also find the initial problem that made this possible?
Definitely. I mean, I would hate to use the word, frequent flyers, but some of the same, there are instances of the victim contacting us several times for new infections that they've identified. I think the important thing here is there's got to be some discussion and debrief, and there's really got to be a security program that's cyclical, that is looking at these things over and over again. As no day here is really the same for us, and I would imagine it's for the most part, it's probably true for organizations where there's people being hired, there's people putting their 2 weeks in, there's security that is the global threat landscape, and then there's also the local incidents we have to be kind of cognizant of. So there should be a formal program that the companies are abiding by. And the password issue is such a big problem out there as far as it's the number one vector for what we see as the initial attack vector is the brute forcing of an RDP port that has been left open for remote access or administration of the host, and that's a very simple, it's an easy fix out there. So my concern is that once the problem is not painful any longer, we stop thinking of it as a problem and we go on our way. So, but just like everything else, whether it's diet and exercise and all the things we don't like to do in those disciplines, the methodical and very routine maintenance is something that becomes so important, where we can identify and start to look at things over and over again and have an actual methodology for doing that, because over time that will break down and we will forget that an intern was hired and maybe used a very simple password, and then the intern went back to school and we left his account active, or her account, and now we have a problem that we had forgotten about. So I sorry to take up the time, but I do definitely think there's a lot to be said for not having if it's not on everyone's radar in that immediate day, then it might fall off and get pushed to another week to take care of, and then ultimately forgotten about.
Yeah, and actually you brought up several important points. This is like a good lead to my next slide. Let's actually take a look at what the attackers are saying, how to avoid their attacks and how complicated their attacks are. So I'm going to share with you the first instance is I'm going to share with you a couple of screenshots from a negotiation, a ransomware negotiation between a victim and the ransomware group. And this negotiation, the victim took some screenshots and put it on Twitter, and I wanted to show it today. I think it's really interesting. There are a couple of very interesting elements in the negotiation, and actually the final stage after, I'll spoiler alert, after the ransomware was paid. So what you're looking at here is actually the support interface for a ransomware group. Of course, this is not support. This is actually the ransomware group, and it says you. This was the actual victim. Criminals actually early on, even when they attacked people at home, realized that in some cases they need to help their victims pay them. Initially, when they asked for bitcoins, some people didn't even know what bitcoins are. So they set up these support centers to teach people how to obtain bitcoins and pay them. Now, when attacks are larger and they target organizations, they use these interfaces to actually do the negotiations. And I've seen some of these negotiations between ransomware groups and ransomware groups and victims. And it's really amazing. It's also really amazing to see what happens when a real negotiator comes in from the victim side and how the tone changes. It's amazing actually to see. But in this case, you can see here the victim contacted the support, the ransomware group. Support says, hello, can I help you? And he says, hello, what do we need to do to get our data deleted from your servers and unlock our files? So first of all, here's exactly what Doug mentioned before here about the double extortion, I think was the term you used, Doug. Data deleted and unlock our files. So obviously they're dealing with a group that is advertising their data and also keeping them, took away their operations. And the attackers are saying, hello, you have 30,000 infected and locked files. Our price consists of 2 services, decryption and deletion of the downloaded data, dual extortion. And they want $10 million in Bitcoins. And they say here, of course, we understand your worries. So we'll decrypt 2 random files for free, just to show them that, if you pay, you'll get everything decrypted. And the victim says here, oh, so in your message that you left us, you mentioned a very special price if we reach to you within 2 days. There's no way 10 million is a very special price. And they say, yeah, well, it's a special price. However, the standard amount for a company of your size. And they start the whole negotiations. And apparently the attackers offer the victim 20% discount. They say, because they say here, in all honesty, this is the victim saying, 8 million puts us in a spot where we would need to double current revenue to keep our doors open. kind of a tough situation to be in. We're willing to give you 3.7 million potentially today. Not a bad payday for the attackers, $3.7 million. They continue the negotiation. They say, hey, if you give us 4 million, we'll decrypt, but not do this, not delete the data, and so on. But what's really interesting is once the victim's paid, look at what the attackers sent to the victim. Here's a list of recommendations to avoid such things in the future. So here's some tips from the ransomware groups telling the victim how not to get attacked again. Starts off with the first thing that Doug just said: turn off local passwords, force end of administrative sessions, update passwords every month. So passwords, right? And then there's a lot of other things here that, you would almost say, well, of course you have to do this. This is like basic security hygiene. Apparently, we're still not doing this enough because they're saying, approved to run only necessary applications. They even specifically call out and say antiviruses alone can't stop us. They're not really useful, but you need an EDR or we suggest a system administrators even get into the HR portion of it. So several tips from attackers. I want to show you another example from a ransomware group. This is from a presentation called 2 weeks with cybercrime cell, with a Russian cybercrime cell by Brooke Kemlow. You can find the presentation on the RSA conference website. I took some screenshots from the tips portion where they also gave tips to Brooke about the attacks and how to avoid them. And they say, secure vulnerable ports, use proper passwords, write in a real programming language. Apparently C is a real programming language. I hated that during my studies. Employ the right people, watch for misconfigured firewalls. So all kinds of basic stuff around security management, network issues, require multi-factor authentication. Again, password length, characters, eliminate knowledge-based authentication, like what's your mother's